I'm so glad that you're with us this morning. We've been going through this series called All In. And sometimes when a church goes through a series that's more than 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks, sometimes individuals get a little bored, or sometimes they're thinking, okay, I've heard this said a different way. Our desire for giving information, my desire for teaching the truth is to give you some tools. To give you the things that if you choose to, you can access. And by accessing those things, it might change and influence the way you think and the way you live. So today, as we walk through this next phase, it's going from interested in Jesus to committed. In order to get committed, in order to really go to that next step, you have to be able to evaluate where you are. You have to be able to evaluate and understand, okay, God, I do love you. Or God, I kind of love you, but I love me more. And then to begin the process of saying, what things do you want me to implement in my life to help me see you more clearly? When we choose to take the next step of commitment, it shows in how we handle our finances. We talked about that. How we can use our interests to help other people. Today we're going to talk about relationships. In the future we'll talk about our schedule. We're so busy. Is our busyness really producing what it should be? And then our talents, those things we have the ability to do in life. But today as we talk about relationships, each one of us have relationships in our life. Some of those relationships are fulfilling. Some of those relationships aren't fulfilling. Some of those relationships bring great peace, and some of them bring great conflict. And I want to give you a couple of tools today that you can begin to process, and if you choose to implement these in different areas of your life, it might impact your relationships. It might impact the way in which you and other people regard and behave towards each other. And if you think about it, there might be people right now who you do not have a relationship with because there's conflict, and you have done everything you know to do to restore that relationship. Then there might be people you have conflict with, and you've done everything you know to do to prevent restoration. So hopefully by giving you some new information, it might alter the way you think. In the core, bottom line foundation, how one human relates to another human. Now, you can think of the people in your life, but think of the people outside of your life. Think of the people who may not have been brought up in the same culture in which you were brought up in. Maybe they weren't brought up in the same community. Maybe there were individuals, when you drive through downtown Scranton, go to sections in Wilkes-Barre. And by God's grace, you were brought up in maybe a different social economic class. Maybe you're a different race. Maybe those individuals are just different than you. How do you relate to them when you drive through town? Is it a situation of thanking God for your blessings? Judging them because they too have been blessed, but they've been blessed differently? Our goal is to help you change the way you see people. Because our perspective of humanity determines our behavior towards humanity. And I need you to really embrace and walk with me on this journey because, yes, it's for those closest to us, it's for those outside of our family relationships and our work relationships, just people in everyday life. But what does God want you to do in regards to being all in, putting Him first in your relationships? See, we have this thing called perspective. And my perspective of Italians is this. I can say that because I'm Italian. My perspective of this individual or these individuals is this. And we all have our perspectives, the way we think. And we get those perspectives from a bunch of information, maybe our experiences. I've met people who do not like men because as a youngster they were abused by men. I've met individuals who don't believe in marriage because of an experience they've had in marriage. And you can put together some thoughts on your own as to how experiences may have shaped your perspective. Then there's your personality. Some people are introverted. Some people are extroverted. You see the world through your experiences. You see the world through your personality. Then we have science. We have a school system. We have an educational system that is telling you that you came from someplace and this is why you're here and in your animalistic state or whatever the case is. So we take science and we add that into the hopper to get our perspective. Religion. Some of you were brought up in decent religious situations. Some of you were brought up in skewed religious situations. Some of you are non-religious, but you have a perspective that comes from maybe that influence. Culture. Culture tells us certain things today that it didn't tell us 20 years ago, and culture will tell us something different in 20 years. So culture is this moving, ebbing and flowing source of information that each generation takes and either embraces as life, or they take it and they evaluate, is this healthy? Because culture tells us today we can do things with unborn babies. Culture tells us that certain things are good and certain things are bad or certain things are acceptable. So we have all these things. And then our environment. If you were brought up in rural Pennsylvania, you may not like people who are brought up in the city. And city folks may think less of people in rural Pennsylvania. So we have all these things that we put into the hopper, and all those things come together. And when they come together, it's really the fuel that we use to determine how we relate to people, how we relate to other people. And from that, we make our choices, we develop our relationships, or we destroy our relationships, or we judge people, or we accept people, or we love people, or we don't like people. We don't like people. But there needs to be a foundation. There needs to be a foundation. The information we're getting may be skewed. It may be impacting what you think, and you may have some incorrect thinking. And as a result, what you're doing is not healthy. What you're doing is not healthy. So we have to go someplace foundational. We have to go way down low and say, what do I need to know that influences my perspective? And in the book of Genesis, it starts out by saying, God created human beings. That's a foundational principle we really need to understand. When he created them like him, with emotion, with will, with the ability to think, the ability to feel. He created them male and female. So when we take this as a baseline to say, wow, every human being was created by God, and every human being, in a very real sense, has the same attributes of God. Well, that can't be true because I work up at SCI Waymart. That can't be true because I work over here, and these people could never. No, it's true. What has happened is over the course of their life, either they or those before them did not get the information to change the way they think, to change their perspectives, so they were guided incorrectly, and they may have made some wrong choices. But it doesn't negate the fact that they were created the way God wanted them to be created. Yesterday, I had the privilege of running out to Uniondale and doing a wedding. Not running out, but driving out and taking a beautiful day. And I needed to get some mints. So I stopped at a gas station, Turkey Hill in Forest City. And there was the young girl behind the counter, a woman at the counter, another gentleman, then me. And the woman behind the counter, the young girl behind the counter, was doing well. She just wasn't doing it to the speed that I thought she should be doing it at because I had someplace to be. And the first woman at the counter finished and turns and goes back and says, you know what, can I get some lottery tickets? The gentleman in front of me is rather frustrated. And I, being a pastor, did not display frustration. I've learned how to hide those ugly traits within. At that moment, when I felt my impatience, and I felt a sense of, let's go, chick. What I realized, what God brought to my mind, is that young lady was created in his image. And yes, I was a little fraudulent in my schedule, so I was running late. But my desire to have her move quickly should not allow me the opportunity to determine her value in that moment. And in that moment, I had to choose to say, God, I'm sorry, and I did. And then to even utter a prayer for her. Because the fact of the matter is we are so quick to judge and to destroy the image of God in other people because they don't respond the way we want them to respond. So that's foundational. Do you know every person is created in God's image? The people you like, the people you don't like, the people who are like you, the people who aren't like you, the people who live here, the people who live in the Middle East are created in the image of God. So what you need to do is you need to take these things that we experience, our personality, the science that we're told we need to believe, the skewed and screwed up religion, our cultural influence, our own environments, and we run them through the truth of God's word before we develop our perspective. Or if our perspective is developed already, then what we need to do is say, God, am I thinking the way I should be thinking, the way you want me to think? Because if I change how I think, it's going to change how I relate to other people. It's going to impact how I communicate, how I love, how I guard, how I guide. It's going to change my life. So what I propose this morning is that wherever you are in life and whatever relationships you have in life, they can be altered by changing some of the information you use to develop and live out your perspective. If you implement God's truth in a way that it may go against some of the things your preconceived mind has already believed and has already started to live out, you will see a positive result. But honestly, if we choose to implement God's truth, that might mean we have to deny ourselves to our own perspective, which is hard to do. So how do you relate to other people? Some of the key relationships in our life, how do we relate? How do child and parent, if you're a child, how do you relate to your parents? If you're a single individual, how do you relate to other single people? How do you relate to other married people? Married people, how do you relate to single people? How do you relate to your spouse? What's the interaction between two spouses? What does that look like? What does sibling to sibling look like? Some of you have some pretty weak relationships. She's stealing my show. She's stealing my show. It's okay. Hold up her doll. If you notice, they both have the same little Ava has a prosthetic and the little doll has one as well, all decorated. But track with me. How do you relate to somebody who brings a child to church and the child walks under the pew and disrupts the service? Does that bother you? Are you frustrated in judging her? Because the reality is this. I'd rather have a kid crawling on the floor with the mother in church than her mother sitting at home without a kid crawling on the floor. So it's these things that cause us to think. Family member to family member. How do you interact with your family members? Coworker to coworker, employee to boss, boss to employee. Every earthly relationship that you have. Every relationship on earth that you don't have. The people you see who you don't know. The people who have possibly a specific odor about them when you meet them. Bottom line is this. How do you relate to humanity? Is it based on your perspective or God's perspective through you? Is God's perspective more powerful than all these things that may have influenced you incorrectly? So we're going to start with child to parent today. We're going to kind of go a little rapidly, but I want to be able to give some principles in just two arenas this morning because I think they're important. How many of you have used this verse on your kids? Honor your father and mother, and you'll live a long life. If you disobey me, you're going to have a short life. Full life in the land the Lord your God has given you. Bottom line is this. Moses was giving direction to his children in Israel, and he's expressing to the children, you need to obey your parents. You need to follow their directions. As a result of your obedience, you will find blessing. Now, some of us in this room, you may be children, you may be young, you may be 10, 12, 15, or you may be 50, and your mom may be 75. And there's a disposition or an attitude you might have to your mom. I believe wholeheartedly, different but the same, that these principles apply. There needs to be honor to your parents. Young people in this room, this is important for you to grasp onto. And the reason it's important for you to grasp onto, because if you don't grasp the principle of obedience and honor to your parents, it will cost you in the long run. It will cost them as well, but probably you more than it will cost them. See, children, obey your parents because you belong to them, for this is the right thing to do. Is that what it says? Children, obey your parents because you belong to the Lord. You belong to the Lord. The bottom line is your obedience to your parents isn't based on your relationship with your parents. Your obedience to your parents is based on your relationship with God. And when you begin to understand that there's a God who loves you, that there's a God who you answer to, little by little you come to the realization that your parents are individuals that God has provided to help you see life differently. Now that sounds kind of clinical and academic, and most children don't think like that. But the simple fact is, children, at face value, you need to obey your parents because God says so. You need to obey your parents because that's what's best for you. In this book, in the book of Proverbs, there are a bunch of principles. They're not promises, but there's some guidelines that we can use. If we choose to implement them in our life, they alter the way we live our lives. They alter the way we see life. They alter our perspective. My child, listen when your father corrects you. Don't neglect your mother's instruction. What you learn from them will crown you with grace and be a chain of honor around your neck. This child has a beautiful bow in her ear. I can see that bow. That bow was put on her by her mother. That's evident of her mother giving her something that is shown to others. When we choose to listen to our father's correction, when we choose to receive our mother's instruction, it's like a crown, it's like a necklace. You see it. You've met children who you see have not really learned what their parents were giving, and it shows in the way they live and the way they behave. Then you've seen other children, it's just like a crown, or it's like something they're wearing physically. You can see that they have a demeanor. You can see that they have an attitude. You can see that they have a pattern of behavior that is good. So there's evidence of following parents' direction. We move from child to parent and parent to child. What is the responsibility of parents? Discipline your children while there's hope. Otherwise, what does it say? If we're honest, some of the difficulty we see in young people today really isn't the result of the young person's behavior. It's a result of the lack of instruction and correction and discipline from the parents. And discipline isn't where you're taking and spanking and beating. Discipline is where you're giving consistent, what's the word? Consistent direction. Consistent instruction. Consistent correction, where you're saying, this is how I would have you to do it. If you choose not to do it, this is the consequence. And it's the same consequence every time. There's boundaries and there's guidelines where you know these are the things you do not cross. And it's not just simply for external obedience, but it's for a hard attitude of understanding. You're trying to develop character. You're trying to develop a child who understands that the world is not about them. There are these beautiful books written by a gentleman called Kevin Lehman. Kevin Lehman wrote a book called Parenting Your Powerful Child. He wrote another book, How to Have a New Teenager by Friday, From Mouthy and Moody to Respectful. Can that happen? Well, according to culture, no. Culture says that all 3-year-olds are terrible threes. All teenagers are mouthy and rebellious. That doesn't have to be. That doesn't have to be. Making children mind without losing yours? What a difference a mom makes. The incredible imprint a mom leaves on her son's life. See, these are resources, $6, $8, $10 a piece. And what's happened in our culture is most people, most families, most parents will spend more on one vacation than they will in an entire lifetime of gaining the tools necessary to be a better parent to their child. There's some more books out there. How to be the dad that she needs. We live in a culture where young ladies are searching for something to bring satisfaction and fulfillment and to soothe a place inside of them that daddy was supposed to soothe. And when daddy doesn't soothe that place inside, they still need that level of masculine affirmation. So at a young age, they start to look for someone who will give them the value that they need, will give them the attention that they need, will give them the physical touch that they desire at a young age. So dads, You have the power to change the destiny of your daughter's future. Mom, you have the destiny to change the power to change the direction of your children's future. What a difference a daddy makes. There's two other authors. This is by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Boundaries with Kids. Boundaries with Kids. We live in a culture, we live in an environment where most homes are child-run, not parent-led. And I'm not trying to make this an indictment. I'm just trying to give you some tools to say, okay, let me evaluate my situation. Who runs the house? Who leads us? Is it a child-run or parent-led? And then lastly, it's not about external obedience. It's not about simply getting your children to do this and to not do this. It's about getting to the place where your child understands that there's a God who loves them, and the reason they're doing this is because there's something bigger for their life than what this world and this culture has to offer. And they can live in this world and not be a geek and not be a freak, and they can have peace and they can have wholeness and they can have purity as a result of the instruction you've given them. But if you leave your responsibility to culture and to environment and to maybe some broken thinking, your children will then have to try to figure out which way is up. Which way is up? Parent a child. Direct your child onto the right path, and when he was older, he will not leave it. Now, some of you may have been the individual who your parents did a pretty good job leading you, and they gave you certain boundaries, and you adhered to those boundaries externally, but your heart was still broken. Your heart was still not really at a place of submission. And what took place as a result? You kind of went off the path for a while. And some of you have come back because you recognized wholeheartedly that this is the path I need to be on. See, teach children how they should live, and they will remember it all their life. They will remember it. And I can honestly believe right now that some of you older folks in here have things that can float around in your mind that were given to you many years ago by people who loved you and tried to show you what was right. And at certain times, those things come back. Point your kids in the right direction so that when they're old, they won't be lost. It's not your career. It's not your lifestyle. It's not you as a parent. That should be the pursuit of what you live for. The pursuit of what you live for should be trying to bring your children to a place where they're able to believe that your instruction is credible, where they're able to believe that the direction you're giving them is for their good, where they're able to understand when they choose not to stay within those boundaries, that there's a consequence that causes them to want to stay in that boundary this time and next time. And as a result, they can tuck under a relationship with God, and they can follow Him. They can accept a love from Him and a trust that although culture is saying do this, I don't have to. I don't have to because I'm okay with my relationship with God. And that kind of moves into the next would be single to single, because our children grow up and they're single at that stage. And when I say single to single, it's not only the 14, 15, 16, it may be the older singles as well. And what's taking place in culture, what's taking place in the church, is we sometimes think there's something wrong with an individual who's single and older. I was 26 when I got married. And people would come to me and say, who are you dating? You're still single? That just made me feel wonderful. That just gave me such a sense of peace. My wife as well was older when she got married. And what took place was there was a lot of pressure from society and from culture that says being single is not a good thing. It was a de-elevation. In a real sense, single people were looked at and are looked at sometimes as substandard to a married person. And when a single person gets their act together, they'll finally get married. Well, I have to tell you point blank, that's not true. Some other lies is marriage is God's highest calling. Marriage is not God's highest calling. Marriage is not God's highest calling. Marriage is an ideal status that all people have to reach. That's not true either. That's not true either. See, what happens is we believe this and we force people into relationships, or we try to use the things around us, or single people take this information that is skewed and say, I need to try to find a spouse. I need to try to find a mate. And ultimately, what God is wanting at that moment is for you to recognize that singleness isn't a problem to be solved. Singleness may be a present situation that needs to be embraced. See, the single and married person before God, in a very real sense, are individuals. So a couple is individual. A single is an individual. And what God desires is a deep level of relationship with these individuals. And if you're married today and you never developed a deep individual relationship with God, and you sought a relationship that you thought was going to fulfill you in marriage, your eyes were probably open and you came to the realization that you could not get the deepest level of fulfillment you were looking for in a marriage relationship. You still experience loneliness. You still experience a distance or an emptiness at times. You experience things that you still have to go to God for to receive, to find that satisfaction and that fulfillment. And God is saying to those of you who are single, embrace that at this moment as a time in space or a time in life where you can connect with me, remove the stigma that there's something wrong, and walk on a journey with me. That doesn't deny the fact that you may want to be married one day. It doesn't deny the fact that you may fully want to have a relationship. But you need to embrace the fact that single people are not incomplete and married people are not complete. And I can guarantee you that there are married people in here who would say amen, but they won't do it for fear of embarrassment or an elbow from their spouse. Because marriage is not the thing that brings the deepest level of fulfillment. The greatest marriage that every person is looking for is someday we will meet Jesus Christ, and we, the bride, will enter a relationship of fulfillment that can never be, in any way compare to anything we can ever experience here on this earth. The Apostle Paul gives us this awesome direction in 1 Corinthians 7. The Apostle Paul was a single guy, and at this stage in his life, this is what he says. He says, I say this as a concession. I say this as a preference. He's writing to the Corinthian church. He's writing to them in the church to say, listen, just listen what I have to tell you. I wish that all of you were as I am, but each of you has your own gift from God. One has this gift, one has the other. Now to the unmarried and widows I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried as I am. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry. For it is better to marry than burn with passion. Like, what? So, I'm a bit on the passionate side, and I want to express that. So I guess I better go find a wife to express that. That's not what he's saying. I'll explain in a moment. See, singles can experience their singleness as something that is good. Paul says, now to the unmarried and to the widows, I say it is good for them to stay unmarried. Now, he's not saying it's the only way, and he's not saying marriage is the only way. He's saying that wherever you are at this present state, if you're single, it can be a good thing. God in his sovereignty has you in the circumstance of singleness, then instead of looking to get out of the circumstance of singleness, look for the fulfillment that you can have with him in that circumstance, and then there just might be a possibility that circumstance changes, but you're no longer looking for something you will never find in another person because you've already found it in him, which helps you be wiser when you go looking for the other person. That make any sense? That was a mouthful. Paul says it's a good place to be. How many individuals on their journey to fulfillment, to sexual satisfaction, have engaged in relationship with someone else, only to find out months or days or years later that it was not as fulfilling as you thought it would be. And as a result, there are scars and there's brokenness, which even prevent you from moving forward in a healthy place. We live in a culture where our children are being shown things in the media, in possibly how we live as parents, that we need somebody to fill us. It's okay to give ourselves away, to hook up, to shack up, to up, whatever. Because this is your right to do what you would want to do. And again, I'm presenting to you principles. There's no judgment coming from me. Make sure you hear that. You can choose to implement these principles. You can choose to believe these principles. And you can watch the benefits of obedience. Paul says it like this further on. I want you to be free from the concerns of this life. If you're single, you can be free from the concerns of this life. But he also says something about married. An unmarried man can spend his time doing the Lord's work and thinking how to please him. But a married man has to think about the earthly responsibility, how to please his wife. His interests are divided. In the same way, a woman who is no longer married or has never been married can be devoted to the Lord and holy in body and in spirit. But a married woman has to think about her earthly responsibilities and how to please her husband. I'm saying this for your benefit, not to place restrictions on you. I want you to do whatever will help you serve the Lord best with as few distractions as possible. We've come to this place of believing that earth is our final destination. Well, as Christians, we know that we'll be in heaven, but we live as if earth is the place where we find fulfillment, where we get to express ourselves. When in reality, what Paul is saying, what Scripture says, is that you have a life purpose. And your life purpose is to love God, to enjoy Him, and to help others find a relationship with Him. And Paul is saying, if you're single, you might be able to do that less hindered. If you're married, you can do it as well. But if you're single, it might be easier for you. That's what he's saying. But he's not saying singleness is the only way. And he's not saying married is the only way. He's saying in whatever situation you are in, make sure you embrace contentment at both ends of that spectrum. Because possibly in a single life, with a lack of fulfillment and a lack of understanding, you may choose to do things that would cause harm to yourself and to others in your pursuit of trying to find something that's going to satisfy you that never will, that I can only give you. Make sense? But each of you has your own gift from God. In the olden days, you don't hear it much today, it's called the gift of celibacy. The celibate person, according to the Bible, would have been the individual who could be single and I'm never lonely. I never have a sexual desire. I'm celibate. It's a gift. I'm not sure totally that's what we're talking about here. I'm talking about, and what I believe is being said here is there are individuals who, in a sense, have been given an ability by God maybe to not be married. They still have the longing for a relationship. They may even have a desire to express themselves sexually, but they've learned that for this period of time called life, they're willing to obey His principles because they have a higher calling to something else. Wherever you are in this room today, married or single, there's a call to holiness. There's a call to godliness. And if you are single, don't despise it. Don't deny it. Accept that it's good. Accept that maybe at this stage in your life, you can be a gift to others in that level of relationship because you are unhindered from certain responsibilities. And those of you who are married, would you be careful not to believe that it's your calling to help every single person find a spouse? Would you alter the way you think when you see somebody single and say, I wonder what's wrong with them? Because those of us who were single, older, felt the stigma of those who were married believing that there was something wrong with us? Maybe I am misspeaking, but I think some of you can embrace what I've just said and understand that maybe you are at times guilty. Now, there are some individuals who have a strong desire to move forward and to be married, strong desire to connect with another individual. And if they've said to you, hey, do you know anybody? Then have at it. But be careful when your belief that marriage is a higher calling than singleness usurps the general disposition of grace towards another individual. See, single and married people both experience loneliness and sexual temptation. In a marriage, it's not acceptable to express yourself outside of that marriage sexually. See, temptation is not a sin. We're all tempted in different ways. We learn to say no to that invitation. I'm sorry, I refuse to give in to that temptation because my perspective is not based on what culture says I can do. It's based on what God says I can do. And God says that wouldn't be best for me and it would affect my relationship with Him. Now to the unmarried widows, I say it's good for them to stay unmarried as I am. But if they cannot, to the unmarried and the widows, but if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it is better marry than to burn. Some individuals have a strong desire to be married, to express themselves relationally, to express themselves sexually. And what he's saying here is that there's an element where you can exercise your singleness with godliness. You can exercise your singleness with godliness, but you need to remain sexually pure if you're single. If you choose not to remain single, then when you're getting married, marriage isn't a solution for a sexual expression. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is marriage is the only place that I condone for you to express yourself sexually. That's what he's saying. If you're married, that's the place, that's the boundaries where you can express yourself sexually. If you're not married and you're single, then you have not been given a place to express yourself sexually. Wow, that's pretty mean. I kind of like what culture says. Culture says, do it this way. God says there's a level of fulfillment that you can have with me that will never be as satisfying as anything else you can try outside of a relationship with me. Single to single, the first thing to say about sex in the single man and sex in the single woman is there should be none. Now, this goes against culture. This is harsh. And if you're sitting here today and it sounds like an antiquated philosophy, it is. It's a biblical philosophy that started a long time ago. And again, I offer to you not judgment, but a tool to believe that God knew what he was saying when he gave the instruction to say, there's a wholeness with me that you will find that will satisfy every other longing. But if you choose to take the next step forward, find that satisfaction in me, then engage in the marriage relationship and enjoy the pleasures of that sexual relationship there. But if you try to enjoy the pleasures of sexual relationship outside of it, you will never find satisfaction. And actually, what happens is you experience harmful and destructive and sinful results. And for those in your past who may have not known the perspective of God or the truth of God, and you expressed yourself before you were supposed to, and you know in a very real sense that it left damage, it left pain, it left some difficulty inside, emotional distress. That was then. This is now. A simplicity of saying, God, I didn't know, I blew it, or God, I knew and I ignored it. But starting over can take place today. Starting over can take place today. So being single is good. Being married is good. Sexual sin is not good in either one of those relationships. Haven't you learned that your body is the home of the Holy Spirit? God gave you and that he lives within you. Your own body doesn't belong to you, for God has bought you with a great price. So every part of your body is to be given back to God because he owns it. God owns us. Young people in this room, listen carefully. You may have a precious gift right now, and that gift is called virginity. And at some point, God wants you to take that gift and give it to the person that he has allowed you to be in relationship with, who loves him more than he loves you, or he loves him more than she loves you. And that gift is to be expressed on that day. For those of you young people in this room who still have that gift, culture, environment, peer pressure, your personality and choices may tell you to give up or give it up or to express yourself. There are a lot of people in this room who I'd venture to say may have believed that, and today they would tell you adamantly, don't do it, don't do it. I read a bunch of articles in preparation from the CDC, Center for Disease Control, and I'm not going to go talk about diseases. What was interesting was this secular article by the CDC said that 14 to 18-year-olds who engage in levels of sexual expression suffer with mental, emotional, physical, and results, and their desire to hurt themselves or take their life is increased. I read some other studies as well. I am not going to present to you studies to change your mind. I'm going to present to you that there's a loving God, whatever age you are, but especially you young people, that is telling you, I love you. And although everything inside of culture and maybe even inside of you says to express yourself, to find somebody, it's not my desire for you. Find a satisfaction in me that is a fulfillment that only I can meet. See, 0 to whatever, 20, 30, we look for the sexual experience. We try relational experiences. We try these things to find the satisfaction. Then we realize none of them work, and we go for a spiritual experience. God, I need a spiritual experience because I've made so many choices that were wrong. True or false? And God is saying, swap those. Look for the spiritual experience. Look for a connection with me, and it'll alter your sexual future. It'll alter your sexual future. So, if right now, based on God's sovereign design for your life, and you are a single person, accept it as good. Accept it as good. Use it as a gift. Use it as a gift. Hold it with godliness. There's some great resources out there. Tim Keller has a book out called The Meaning of Marriage, A Vision for Married and Single People. If you're married, I suggest you read it. He also has this phenomenal YouTube video out there that says Theology of Singleness, which will change your mind to come to this place of not saying that, oh, I want to be single forever, but saying, God, I accept where I am today. Bring me the next level of satisfaction and contentment that I've never had in my singleness. Show me. And from that, there may develop the next phase of relationship. So this morning, I want you to realize that I didn't have the opportunity to speak on every one of these different situations. But some of you right now have very difficult everyday life relationships, and they're difficult because of how you relate to them. It's not because of who they are or how broken they are or what social class they are or how obnoxious they are. It has to do with your perspective, and your perspective may not be taking hold of God's truth. Your perspective may be taking hold of nothing more than your experiences and what you presently think. And God is saying, I want you to embrace my truth that influences your perspective so it changes how you relate to other people. So right now, you think of the other people in your life and how you're relating to them. Parent to child, child to parent. Some parents in this room today need to say, I need to get some more tools. I spent more time learning how to prepare for my career, which is only going to last 30 years, than I did in preparing how to be for a parent, which is going to last forever. 18, the most crucial years. Maybe it isn't that single relationship or single married or married single, or you're single and it's like, this stinks. This stinks. God, I give it to you and I will accept and obey and believe that you and I can have a relationship that's so fulfilling that, yes, I still have a desire for an earthly relationship, but I'm not going to look for a relationship outside of you until I find that peace. Young people in this room, God is always a God of forgiveness, but what's even better is God is a God of guidance, and he will always help you make the right choice before you need to ask for forgiveness, if you're willing to. It depends on where your heart is. So I'm going to ask our worship team to come up at this time, and I'm going to ask you to evaluate if there are relationships in your life right now that are not in a healthy place as a result of the information you're using to determine how you think, and then what you think is causing you to act improperly to others. If you are single, know this. God loves you just like he loves anybody else. And what you need to do is embrace from him an acceptance of where you are in his sovereignty, and commune and connect and believe that as I grow in this, it may be a relationship, it may not be, but I'm okay either way because I'm okay this way.